There are things a man carries through this life he can never set down, and there are things he'd trade his last breath to undo. But every so often, rare as rain in a dry summer, a man does the one thing that's simply right. Not because it serves him, not because anybody's keeping count, just because the moment demands it of him. And he answers, I was in Red Rock Flats, Arizona Territory, in the fall of 1887, when I watched a man named Cole Hardin spend his final $11 buying a woman her freedom on the courthouse steps. $11. The price of a decent saddle repair and a week's worth of meals. That was the going rate for Mara Callum, a young woman of 23, auctioned off in the morning light to settle her dead father's accounts. In that quiet moment on a pale November day with dust in the air and shame in the crowd, that was the last generous thing Cole Hardin would do before the world reached up and dragged him back into the life he'd tried so hard to leave behind. Because what Mara whispered to him afterward, once the transaction was finished and the witnesses had scattered, it wasn't a plea for her own future. She wasn't thinking about herself at all. What she asked of that man opened a wound in him that had already scarred over once. And some wounds, when they reopen, they go deeper the second time. If you know what it is to be called back into a storm you barely survived, partner, then pull up close and ride with me tonight. Hit that like button, subscribe if these old campfire tales speak to something in you, and leave a comment below. Where are you tonight? What hour is it where you sit? Now let's go back to Red Rock Flats and tell you everything that unfolded. Red Rock Flats crouched at the foot of the Drago Hills like a man hiding from a creditor. 2 saloons, a church, a land office, and a general freight concern that answered, one way or another, to a man named Harlan Stroud. The streets were packed caliche, pale as bone and cracked through the middle, and the cottonwoods lining the main road had turned gold and copper the way they always do when October bleeds into November in the territory. It was the kind of morning that could fool you into peace if you didn't know what was scheduled to happen at the courthouse steps. Mara Callum had known what was coming for 4 days. Her father, Edwin Callum, had died of lung sickness in October, leaving behind 50 acres of river-bottom farmland, a plow horse, and $800 in debt owed to Harlan Stroud's freight and lending operation. Edwin had borrowed against harvest that drought and bad luck had taken from him, the way the territory ground down good men one season at a time. The paperwork Stroud's lawyer had prepared, reviewed by a circuit judge who owed Stroud considerably more than gratitude, stated in clean legal language that should the debt remain unpaid, the holder held the right to contract the debtor's dependents as bound labor until every cent was recovered. Plain spoken, that meant Mara and her 13-year-old brother Eli belonged to Harlan Stroud the morning their father stopped breathing. Stroud was not the kind of man who looked like the thing he was. Well-built, clean-shaven, a charcoal suit with silver buttons regardless of the heat. He carried a controlled, patient smile that never quite touched his eyes, and he talked to every man in the same deliberate, unhurried voice. The kind of voice that turns promises into policy and menace into casual observation. He owned the freight wagons running up from Tucson, the card tables in the Copperhead Saloon, and a work camp out on the Drago Wash where he kept a crew of bound laborers grading a cut road ahead of the coming railroad spur. 6 men on his ledger carried firearms. Every wrong thing he'd done had a document behind it. His lieutenants were brothers. Virgil Crane, the older one, was tall and lean and quiet in the way that makes livestock uneasy, and dogs press flat to the ground for no reason they can name. Clyde Crane was broader, younger, with a laugh like a hinge that needed oil, and a mean streak he wore as naturally as his boots. They'd ridden with Stroud going on 6 years. Neither had spent a night in a cell. The local judge made sure of that personally. On the morning of November 2nd, Mara stood on those courthouse steps in her mother's brown dress, the finest thing she owned, while Stroud read the terms of her indenture aloud to perhaps 30 townspeople. Most studied the ground. The Reverend stood off to one side with his hands clasped and his eyes down and said not one word. Eli had been transported to the road camp 3 days prior on the grounds that the paperwork was already processed. Stroud had assured Mara he'd release the boy once the debt was satisfied. She didn't believe him. She had nothing else to bargain with. The bidding lasted 5 minutes. Stroud opened at $9. Silence. He dropped to 7. More silence. The particular heavy silence of people who understand what they're watching and have decided not to intervene. Then a voice came from the side street, quiet and even. 11. Nobody had noticed the man arrive. He was leaning against the wall of the feed store on the adjoining street, one boot crossed over the other, a tin cup held loosely at his side. Lean, weathered, maybe 30, with a face that had absorbed considerable weather, and a pair of gray-green eyes that didn't miss much and didn't offer much back. Brown canvas coat the color of dry scrub. Hat low on his brow. He didn't look like anything in particular. That was a quality he'd cultivated deliberately over the better part of 2 years. His name, the one he was going by, was Cole Hardin. The name the territory had attached to him during 5 years of hard federal work out of Yuma, the name that appeared in warrants and depositions and courthouse records, was the Gray Line Marshal. But in Red Rock Flats in November of 1887, he was just another worn-out drifter with $11 and no pressing reason to be anywhere. Stroud studied him with that careful smile. "Sold," he said. Simply as that. Cole crossed the street and counted the coins into Stroud's palm, every cent he carried, and accepted the folded contract paper the lawyer pushed at him. He didn't read it. He looked at Mara. She watched him the way a cornered animal watches a hand reaching toward it, hope and suspicion braided so tight they were indistinguishable. She didn't say thank you. She said, "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Fine by me," Cole said. He extended the indenture paper toward her. "This belongs to you. Do whatever you like with it." He turned and walked back toward the feed store. She followed because the alternatives were worse. He let her walk alongside him without filling the silence. He collected his horse, a gray gelding he called Verdict, which tells you something about the man, and walked it down to the water trough at the far end of the block. Mara kept pace. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Seemed like a fair price," he said. "That's not an answer." He stopped and glanced sideways at her. "No," he said. "It isn't." He went back to the horse. They sat together in the shade of the feed store awning for the better part of an hour. The town moved around them, doing what towns do. A man hauled lumber past on a flatbed. 2 women on the opposite walkway looked straight ahead. Nobody in Red Rock Flats was making eye contact with anything they didn't have to. It was in that quiet that she told him about Eli. She told it the way people tell the most important thing, saving it for last after the smaller words have run dry. Her brother was 13 years old. Stroud had sent him out to the road camp on the Drago Wash 3 days before Cole rode into town. The indenture contracts covered both of them. By purchasing Mara's contract, Cole had freed Mara only. Eli was still up there with Virgil Crane running the crew. She didn't ask him directly. She looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said, "I understand you don't owe me a thing. I know you've given everything you had. I know whatever road brought you to this town, it wasn't this one." She paused. "But he's 13 years old." Cole was quiet for a long stretch after that. Long enough that a man watching from a distance might have assumed he'd stopped listening. He was staring at a knot in the feed store timber, working at it with his thumbnail. His face had gone flat and still the way a man's face goes when he's carrying something he doesn't let himself examine too often. He'd had a younger brother once. That was a thought he generally refused to finish. "Tell me about the road camp," he said. "Not yes, not I'll do it. Just that question." Mara, who was perceptive enough to understand what the question meant, told him everything she knew. "Now hold on to something before we go further, partner. If you've ever climbed out of something dark and sworn to yourself you were done with it, if you've ever walked away from a fight or a badge or a purpose that was costing you more than it was giving, then you already understand something of what it took Cole Hardin to ask that question. He hadn't quit out of cowardice. He'd quit the way a man quits when he's given the last thing he had, and the world absorbed it without acknowledgement. 5 years riding federal circuit out of Yuma through country that would break most men in a season. He'd done that until it finished breaking him too. And then he'd set it down and spent 2 years rebuilding himself into someone who didn't reflexively read every room for the exit. $11. That was the sum total of 2 years of work. And here was the world asking again. Like and subscribe right here, friend, and drop a comment below. Where are you tonight? What time is it where you are? We'll be back in Red Rock Flats in just a moment. They made camp that night in a dry arroyo 4 miles south of town, in the shadow of a stand of ocotillo and old mesquite that had been rooted there since before anyone now living was born. The desert goes cold fast in November, sharp and clean, nothing like the damp chill of the north. Mara built up the fire while she talked. Moving hands are how you say the things that don't come easy sitting still. The road camp held 18 workers. Some had arrived looking for the wages Stroud advertised. Most had arrived the same way Mara had, through debt papers and a compliant judge and an account that never seemed to diminish no matter how many hours went into it. Virgil Crane ran the whole operation from a ledger that recorded every worker, every shift, every dollar of claimed debt. That ledger was the mechanism behind everything Stroud had constructed. Without it, the contracts collapsed. Without it, the judge had nothing to present in any proceeding. "You want the ledger?" Cole said. "I want my brother," Mara said. "I understand that. But if we take the boy and walk away from the rest of it, you know what follows?" He fed wood to the fire. Stroud builds another camp. Finds another judge. Finds another family with a dead father and a debt they can't clear. He looked at her across the flames. "I've watched this pattern before." "You talk like a lawman," Mara said. "I was one. What changed?" The fire shifted. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called. Cole watched the coals. "The work ran out of road for a while," he said. "I ran out with it." Come morning, he climbed to a high ridge above the wash and spent 3 hours working a worn field glass across the road camp. He counted men, mapped the layout in his head the practiced way. Cook fire, a canvas command tent where a man like Crane would keep his paperwork. 2 posted at the access road. Work parties heading out with tools. And the ones who fell behind getting pulled aside by Clyde Crane. Then a small figure in a green shirt carrying a water bucket from the creek. Something shifted in his chest that had been still for a long time. The boy was alive, unharmed as best he could read. Virgil Crane was methodical. Cole had already determined that from the camp's organization. Methodical men keep predictable schedules and sleep in predictable locations. That makes them possible to plan around. The camp itself sat in a natural bottleneck where the wash narrowed between 2 limestone formations. "One road in, one road out." He came down and told Mara what he'd seen. Then he told her what he intended to do about it. "You're going in by yourself?" she said. "I'm going in first. You follow after. I don't have a weapon." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a short-barreled Remington in a scuffed holster, held it toward her. "You do now." When she reached for it, he held on a moment. "This is not for show," he said. "If I tell you to fire, you fire without stopping to think about it. Are we clear?" She took it. Her hand was steady. He marked that. He spent the afternoon walking her through loading, stance, breath control, trigger discipline. She learned quickly. The way people learn quickly when the lesson is attached to survival. By the time the sun dropped behind the Dragos, she could put 3 out of 5 into a tin can at 25 feet, which was enough. "Stay behind the limestone outcropping until you hear 2 short whistles," he told her. "When you hear them, come straight to the boy." "Nothing else." "I'll handle Crane. What about the ledger?" "I'll handle that too." "Cole." She said his name in a way that made him look at her squarely. "Don't die doing this." He very nearly smiled. It was not a thing his face did frequently or naturally. "I'll see what I can manage." He went in at 2 in the morning. That is the hour I believe was purpose-built for men who have something to recover or something to atone for. The fires had burned to embers. The stars above the high desert were so dense and bright they seemed close enough to disturb. Even the posted sentries had let their attention drift, chins dipping, eyes going soft. He'd spent an hour before dark studying the western base of the cliff, learning where to place his feet in silence. 3 low fires in the camp, enough ambient light to move by without destroying his vision. He passed through the sleeping work crew like water finding a path through stone, past the horse line to the canvas command tent near the cliff wall. He lifted the flap and stepped through. Virgil Crane sat at a folding table with the ledger open before him, one finger tracing a column of figures, a cup of cold coffee at his right hand. He looked up. Cole had the Colt leveled before Crane's hand covered 3 inches toward his holster. "We're going to keep this quiet," Cole said. Crane raised both hands deliberately. He was a man who recalculated rapidly. "You have no idea what you're walking into," Crane said. "I've had that said to me before." "Slide the ledger across," Crane slid it. Cole tucked it inside his coat without lowering his eyes. "Eli Callum," he said. "Which tent?" "Nothing." "You heard me." "You won't make it off this camp," Crane said. "You fire that weapon, Clyde is awake in 10 seconds. 6 armed men between you and the road." "I'm not planning to fire it," Cole said. "I'm planning to tie you to that tent pole and walk out." He produced a length of cord from his belt. "Start making noise and I'll reconsider. That's your decision to make." Crane looked at the cord, looked at the Colt, looked at the man holding both. "Third tent from the far cook fire," he said. "The one with the patched side panel." Mara was at the limestone formation when Cole came around the western face. He gave 2 low whistles and she came at a run. He pointed her toward the tent and followed 3 strides back, hand near the colt, reading the camp. Eli was awake. Children kept in places like that don't truly sleep. He looked up when Mara pushed through the tent flap and made a sound that existed somewhere below language. The sound of a child who has been counting hours for days and stopped trusting that the count would ever end. Mara had her arms around him before either of them spoke. They were moving toward the western wall when Clyde Crane stepped out of the dark between 2 cook fires with a rifle already shouldered. "That's far enough," Clyde said. That grinding laugh was starting to build in him. "Virgil," he called. "Nothing from the command tent." His eyes moved to Cole. "Who are you, stranger?" Cole stepped between the rifle and the 2 behind him. "You're pointing a rifle at a child," Cole said. "Sit with that a moment." "I'm pointing it at a thief," Clyde said. "Your brother's unharmed. He's just indisposed at the moment." The camp was stirring now, work crew coming awake, confused and frightened. Stroud's gun hands were pulling themselves upright, hands moving toward iron, trying to read the firelight. Cole read the situation the way he'd read 100 before it. 6 weapons in various states of readiness. Clyde Crane with a rifle already up. 1 Colt against all of it. A woman behind him with a short Remington and a 13-year-old to keep alive. He'd stood in worse configurations. "I need everyone to hear what I'm about to say," Cole said, loud enough to carry across the camp without crossing into a shout. He was addressing everyone now, gun hands and work crew alike. "I have Harlan Stroud's ledger of indenture contracts." A sound moved through the assembled workers. He let it settle. "Every man here working off a debt that never seems to shrink, your name is in this book. Your terms are in this book. When this ledger reaches the federal marshal's office in Tucson, it is going to receive considerable attention." He looked at the gun hands. "You gentlemen might want to consider which side of that accounting you'd rather be on." 2 of them set their weapons down. One stepped backward and sat on a boulder and said quietly, "I got children at home." Clyde Crane had not moved the rifle a fraction. Whatever had animated his easy cruelty had now been replaced by something colder and less predictable. "You're a dead man," he said. "That's possible," Cole said. He could feel the Colt in his palm, feel that narrowing quiet that came over him when everything reduced down to a single moment. But not tonight. Clyde pulled the trigger. The shot went wide. Not because Clyde was poorly aimed, but because in the half-second between decision and discharge, Mara Callum raised the short Remington and fired. She hit Clyde Crane in the right shoulder, high and clean, precisely where Cole had instructed her to aim. Clyde went down like a man who has had his certainty removed without warning, which was exactly what had happened. The rifle rang against the rock. The camp went the way camps go after an unexpected shot, completely motionless for 1 long breath. Cole walked over to where Clyde lay and recovered the rifle. He looked at the remaining gun hands one by one. Anyone else? No one was. The work crew was a different matter. They weren't inclined to fight, but they weren't in any condition to simply stand up and walk away either. Some had come voluntarily, most had not. Cole told them all the same thing. The ledger was going to the federal marshal in Tucson, and anyone willing to make that ride and speak to what they'd experienced in this camp was welcome to come. 7 of them did. One was a man named Bellows, who turned out to have spent a decade as a county land recorder, which happened to be precisely the kind of credential a federal prosecutor would have ordered if he could. Harlan Stroud was arrested in Red Rock Flats on November 7th by 2 federal marshals out of Tucson. They'd been assembling a case against him for the better part of 18 months and had been missing the final piece. Bellows, the land recorder from the work camp, supplied that piece. The ledger supplied everything else. The Crooked Circuit judge didn't wait to be summoned. He composed a letter of resignation and wrote out before first light, which is how a guilty man confesses when he lacks the character to say it directly. Virgil Crane stood trial the following spring and received 6 years. Clyde received 4, reduced on account of his injury and a lawyer who understood how to speak about hardship. Stroud received 9, which every man and woman who'd spent time in that road camp considered modest. That's what sufficient money in the right legal hands can sometimes produce. The indenture contracts were voided. Edwin Callum's 50 acres of river-bottom farmland went back to Mara and Eli Callum, unencumbered. Cole Hardin was gone from Red Rock Flats before the sun showed on the morning of November 3rd. He left before Mara stirred, before Eli had finished sleeping the deep, trusting sleep of a child who no longer has to be afraid. He left the Remington on the blanket beside Mara, no letter. He wasn't that kind of man, but Mara told me years afterward that she found folded in the pocket of the canvas coat he'd left on the tent rope a single sheet of paper. The indenture contract for Mara Callum, the one he'd bought off Stroud's palm on the courthouse steps. On the back of it, in small, careful script that looked like it had once belonged to someone who filled out a great many official forms, he had written 5 words. The account is settled in full. That was all. No signature. No direction. I asked Mara once, many years later, when she was running the dry goods store she'd built on her father's bottomland, and Eli was up in Tucson studying law, whether she'd ever learned what became of him. She thought on it the way a person considers something they've already made their peace with. Then she said, "A freight driver out of Yuma mentioned a name to me once. Said there was a man called the Gray Line Marshal who'd come back onto the federal circuit. Said he was writing again." She smoothed her apron on the counter. "I don't know if it was him. I don't think I need to." I believe she had that exactly right, friend. Some things belong to a man and to the long road ahead of him. They don't require a witness. I've had a good many years out here to think on what I saw in Red Rock Flats in the fall of 1887. I've thought about Harlan, Stroud with his patient smile, and his paperwork that dressed exploitation up as contract law. I've thought about Mara on those courthouse steps in her mother's dress. About Eli hauling water at first light with no one coming. And I've thought most often about Cole Hardin against the feed store wall with $11 and a road-dusted coat, watching something happen 20 feet away that was entirely none of his concern. The world has never been short of Strouds. Men who figured out that if you dress the wrong thing up in legal language and keep a judge on retainer, you never have to raise your voice about any of it. What the world runs lean on is the other kind. The kind who leans against a wall on a gray November morning, sees something terrible close enough to touch, and reaches into his pocket for whatever he's got left. $11. That's all it took to set the whole thing in motion. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, partner. A man who'd spent 2 years running from the person he'd been could still show up when the moment required it. Could still walk back into the fire one more time when a 13-year-old boy needed someone to come looking. Where you've been doesn't constitute the whole of who you are. Your history can account for you without possessing you. Cole Hardin proved that on a November morning with the last $11 to his name. I've held on to that story a long time. I hope it travels with you too. If these old campfire tales mean something to you, I'd be honored to have you back on the trail. Like this one, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. What time is it where you are? Which story has stayed with you the longest? We'll be right here waiting. Keep your powder dry, friend, and your conscience clear. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are entirely invented. The Arizona Territory and the people who carved their lives out of that hard country deserve honest telling. This story aims to honor the spirit of that world while being what it is, a tale told by firelight, shaped with care for the frontier and everything it meant to the people who lived it. Until we meet again on the trail.